kind of personal question. I hope you don't mind. But how many of you here are wearing aluminum underwear? Because if you are, you need to be warned. You need to be warned not to go to Colorado. Because in Colorado, it is illegal to wear underwear that's made out of aluminum. The reason for that law is this. At many stores nowadays, they have sensors installed at the exits that are able to detect if items are being carried out of the store without being paid for. You've seen those sensors. They're in just about every store nowadays. But what shoplifters have found is that if you wrap items in aluminum, those sensors aren't able to detect them. So some shoplifters have started wearing aluminum underwear and sticking the items down in their pants in order to get them out of the store. Turn to the person sitting next to you and ask, are you wearing aluminum underwear? It's certainly not news to anyone here, but stealing is a widespread problem in our society. Even though you shall not steal is right there in the Ten Commandments, stealing is still something that goes on each and every day. You read about stealing in the news all the time. Just this past week in the newspaper, there was a story about a Pennsylvania Superior Court judge who got caught stealing from his insurance company. Apparently, a few years ago, he had had a minor fender bender with his car, but he ended up turning in claims of more than $400,000. But he got caught, and now at the age of 60, he's going to be spending the next 4 years in prison. Or back around Christmas time, there was a story about some city of Pittsburgh public works employees who stole a motorcycle and then took it around town trying to sell it while they were being paid to be at work. Or about that same time, there was a story from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where a city worker there stole about $100,000 from the city's parking meters. For of course, the most notorious story about stealing in the news right now concerns Bernie Madoff and the $50 billion that he stole from the thousands of people who gave him money to invest for them. When we hear that word stealing, quite often violent images come into our minds. Images of armed bank robbers or of mass muggers in the street. But the reality is that a lot of stealing takes place not with violence, but with deception, where people hand over their money to buy something, but in return they discover that they get a whole lot less than they thought they were buying. For instance, you've undoubtedly heard the expression, to let the cat out of the bag. Well, back in the Middle Ages, when people went to the market to buy a small pig that they could take home and turn into pork chops or bacon, sometimes a dishonest merchant would hand them a bag with a cat inside of it instead of a pig. And it was only after the customer got home and opened the bag and let the cat out that they came to discover that they had been taken. That in essence, that merchant had robbed their money from them. Stealing like that, by lying and deceiving people, unfortunately takes place all the time. For instance, lawyers generally bill their clients so much per hour for their services. Well, one lawyer got caught billing his client for 43 hours of work when he had worked for that person for just one day. Or another lawyer was caught sending out bills for more than 6,000 hours of work per year for 4 years in a row. Sure, most lawyers are hard-working, but do you really think that lawyer was spending 120 hours per week, year-round, working for his clients? No, he was essentially stealing from them by inflating his bills. Or even among clergy, among ministers today, a growing problem is the stealing of sermons. For instance, a minister at a very large United Church of Christ congregation in Washington, D.C., had to resign his position in disgrace a few years ago when it was found out that he had been stealing his sermons from another minister. What happened was that one of his parishioners was in New York City one weekend and went to church there. But then the next week, when the parishioner was home and went to his church in Washington, he was surprised to find that the minister preached the exact same sermon. What that minister in Washington was doing was reading that other minister's sermons on the internet and then passing them off as his own. When I found out about that incident, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. You see, over the years, I've had more than 300 of my sermons published in different journals and on different preaching websites. Those resources are there so that other ministers can consult those sermons and get ideas for their own preaching. But just like when you wrote essays or term papers in high school, ministers are supposed to use footnotes or in some way indicate that they're borrowing material from someone else. And so what I did was I took one of the sermons I had published and Googled a couple of unique phrases from it. And right away, I found that a minister at a 600-member congregation near Atlanta had preached my sermon verbatim to his congregation. He even got so far as to put the sermon up on his website, word for word, with his name on it. Stealing comes in many shapes and forms. Or consider our federal government. I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that quite a bit of stealing goes on in Washington. No, the congressmen and the senators aren't necessarily stuffing federal funds into their own pockets, although that